Everyone. Welcome to ODI Leeds and the Open Data Saves Live session as part of Leeds Digital Festival. We have about 50 people signed up for this morning's session, so if you've ever used Zoom before, you know that it takes a while for people to join the Zoom room. So you've got me just filling whilst people join the sessions. And today is a very Leeds focused session, but don't let that disappoint you. We've got some fantastic subjects and speakers to talk to us. So we've got Tom Riordan. Tom's just joined, I can see that, from Chief Exec of Leeds City Council. He's going to talk about, I think he's going to talk about test and trace, and also what the response of a local council. And obviously we're all very interested in how that's panning out right at the moment. We've got Alistair Bullward from NHS Digital, who leads on open data for NHS Digital, so very relevant. And he's got some interesting thoughts about what's happened so far and what they're going to do next, which he's been talking to ODI Leeds about and how we help. So that's amazing too. And then one of our favourite projects that's been going on with a great company based in Leeds, TPP. So Chris Bates from TPP and System 1 are going to talk about their open safely work that they've done with the team down in Oxford. So Ben Goldacre, who's a friend of ODI Leeds and also a passionate open innovation, open data, open source code. And the great thing that, as Ben has said, he's just really happy that open safely exists, and it isn't a report, it's an actual thing that has worked and exists with real code. So I'm really looking forward to Chris telling us about how that came together and the 25 million lines of code and the 25 million lines of data and all the code and how that worked really rapidly. So we're 1 minute past 11. And I'm quite liking the new etiquette now of people on video calls, that people turn up early. So when calls used to start at 20 past the hour, and people were apologise for being late, I think everyone started to get the hang of the technology. So people are still entering the room, they're coming on. One of the other things, we're going to finish off, and we're going to talk about what Open Data Saves Lives is going to do next. So whilst people are joining, I'll let people know, and then people can ask questions as we go. So Open Data Saves Lives was a response of, it came out of discussions we've had with Mark Farr of Beautiful Info and other parts of the NHS over 2 or 3 years really. And we were constantly asked by people in the health sector if we could get involved, but they never seemed to be a way that a thing like us, an organisation like ODI Leeds, could actually engage with such a large organisation. So when we did our pitch, our work with the Netherlands government, and Mark Farr came and spoke about the work he'd been doing at Kent CCG and the work he'd been doing in health, the programme of work we started was Open Data Saves Lives. That's his pre-COVID. And that coincided with our sponsorship by NHS Digital and NHSX. And it was our way of allowing people in the health and social care sector to engage with us without being scared, without mentioning care.data ever, without getting hung up on, oh my God, privacy, oh my God, sharing, oh my God, open data, and actually focus on fixing problems, doing it in the open, sharing it wildly so that we get the maximum benefit. So that started last year, and then at the start of COVID, Open Data Saves Lives COVID was our response alongside Beautiful Info as a once a week session about trying to fix things with data. And we've had some fantastic speakers over the period, and we've gained a load of knowledge, and I think hopefully people have made new friends and done new stuff on the back of this. I know that people have used the resources that have been generated by Open Data Saves Lives. So what do we do next? So what is going to happen is that Open Data Saves Lives will turn into a more formal partnership between ourselves and Beautiful Information over the next 2 to 3 months. We'll work with ODI HQ and how do you build a sustainable model for a data thing. What exactly are we creating? But we're really creating a new institution that faces the world using the web and data to fix problems. So we'll be looking at the inequalities around health data, the inequalities around the world, and how we respond to the COVID emergency using the power of the web, and not to create any more walled gardens, and to get the data back to where it needs to be used usefully. So if anyone would like to get involved, please do get in touch with ODI Leeds or Beautiful Information. Please do get in touch with us on Twitter. There'll be new websites and projects going up over the course of the end of this year. And we want to make sure that people understand that we don't own Open Data Saves Lives. We don't own the outcomes. We all do. So how do we make this for everybody is one of our challenges over the next 2 to 3 months. And how do we make a massive impact in what we do? So I'd like to leave that there and let people think about that during our talks, and then we can get in touch with you and you can work with us over the next few months. The Health Foundation have committed to work with us over the next few months about how this could work, and we've got a really interesting project around looking at the deployment of virtual technology in GP surgeries. It might sound a bit boring, but I think it's a massively important change in the way that people engage with the NHS. And I've not told you that yet, Chris Bates, but we'd like to talk to TPP about how we can maybe talk to you and how that data might be useful to us. We've been told it's impossible to answer this question, but that's quite a nice challenge that we'd like to take on.
You've just called my job boring, Paul.
Well, my job's pretty boring as well, but you know what I mean. It's trying to fix some of the boring stuff that might make a massive difference is really important to us. So what I'd like to do, the way the speakers are going, I think I saw Tom Riordan up there, Alistair, Bullward. I think you are here. Is that right?
Yeah, I am.
Well,
here.
we won't ask you to speak first, here. Alistair. Yep. Great stuff. And Chris Bates. So I'm going to ask Tom to go first, then Alistair, and then Chris. And then we are going to try and finish before 12 so that we don't end up over the hour and people get a useful use of their time. So, Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Great to see everybody. Thanks for this opportunity and all the great work that ODI are doing. I don't think data has ever been as important for forming the background to decisions that affect people's lives, particularly during this pandemic. And the work that you've done and you continue to do is absolutely crucial to the city, and I think to a much wider group of people these days. So thanks for that. Thanks also, before Chris speaks, to TPP for the work they've been doing with us and others to help us track the virus and try and get ahead of it. It's been really crucial, and you'll hear more, I'm sure, from Chris about that. In my 10 minutes, I thought I'd talk, as much about the national role that I had, because that tends to be the one people are all interested in and pretty obsessed by at times. The work that's going on. It's hard to explain to people just how intense the period of work was when I started in the second week in May to the middle of July, working for the government, as well as being Chief Executive of Leeds City Council. I do say to people it nearly did me in, and it actually did. I wouldn't recommend having two jobs to anyone. The challenge was enormous in the sense that a test and trace system had been set up at the centre as a result of the what happened during March, where the test and trace capability that we had in the country through Public Health England and the public health teams in local authorities was obviously overwhelmed by the exponential growth in the virus during that period. And I think there's a big debate that people will continue to have about the reasons for that, and why it happened and when we locked down and all of that, which I won't go into for obvious reasons. But what they tried to do after that was to come up with a national system that could have the capability to operate at scale, and that's when the testing capability started to be ramped up, and with that the tracing capability as well, with a contact centre, national contact centre arrangement, whereby you would basically deal with a rising and significant number of cases, as we're finding at the moment. Again, I won't go into the debate about where testing is and whether it should be further on than it is, and how all that is going. Suffice to say that there is it's an absolutely fundamental building block of keeping on top of any virus. The bit I was brought in to do was to basically create a local element to the system, a bit like the German model, whereby you would have a local foundation of test and trace and contain activity that would keep try and keep on top of the virus at a local level, and that led to what's called the contain framework, and the local activity that's actually kept us, has been pretty successful through the summer. But it is now, obviously, with the second wave with us, we're finding it extremely challenging to stop the spread of the virus as it's happening as we speak. And that, as I said, is to do with having a national testing system and tracing system that works, and having that linked into the local activity. What came out in over the course of that period was that the more local you make something, the more effective it is. And so the capability of the local testing and tracing is close to 100% actually, in terms of tracking people down. It's the more generic and I guess slightly more distant national attempts to track people down that are not quite as effective, and so there's constant work going on to try and bring that together. Just bringing it back to data in the time that I've got, there was a big one of the biggest challenges I had. If you can imagine being in a job where every single thing you did was under a microscope of the national media, and that's because every household in the country is interested in what you're doing, because it affects their daily lives. And so I went from being bothered about what was on page 7 of the Yorkshire Post to being pretty relaxed about being on the front page of the Times or the Telegraph and on the Today programme. And so you just have to recognise that this is a massively challenged environment where data becomes really, really significant in news terms. And so access to data was a massive challenge for me through that period. And I basically worked with the centre and with the Director of Public Health to free up the use of data for a much wider range of people and access to that data from the local public health teams. It's still not quite there. I think there's more that could be done to open it up even further, but we made a lot of progress. And the other thing about the data which was interesting and remains interesting is that the main figures that people looked to make decisions about, so the rate per 100,000 that you'll see that at the moment in Leeds today is in the late 80s. It'll probably move into the mid 90s tomorrow. That's one of the key building blocks of the decisions that are taken and what's in the public consciousness about how we deal with the virus. But as important, as you know, as data experts, are the trends. So how much are we accelerating or decelerating? Also, other key data like what's the positivity rate is as important as that absolute data as well. So looking at both of those and cutting through with that more nuanced message has been very difficult for people. And what I advocated from the start was the more open we can make the data, the better, because you've got to be able to almost wake up in a city or a town across the country and see the weather forecast and also see what your COVID rating is. And if you can do that, then you get people on side. If you give them confidence in the data that's available, then that can only help. So it's a work in progress to keep that going. You know, there are many other, you know, things I could talk about. We need the strongest possible partnership between national and local organisations and national and local government through this next period. I would like to see us think about, you know, the mental health of people and the economy working well in a COVID safe environment, rather than the sort of feeling that you're making a difference by forming restrictions that sometimes don't actually work in practice, in how people are complying with them. So we've got to think outcome as much as input, and that's where the data element can really help us as well. So the more we can be able to measure how much people are complying, how much people are on side with what we're trying to do, the more we can build that consensus, that we get to a point where peer pressure is so much more powerful than a national diktat or a local diktat from the council. If we can create a city peer pressure where people are calling people out actually and conforming to what we're trying to do because they buy into it and they think it's fair and they think it balances the public health element with the economy and the mental health and living your lives element, then that can only be a good thing. So, you know, that's the big thing that I'm trying to achieve at the moment. There's a good chance we'll enter into further restrictions as we go through this week and into next week. But the key for me through the winter is striking that balance between putting the right restrictions in place, being able to enforce them effectively, but getting the public's consent and buy-in to what that means for them. And that does require, I think, through the winter, more of a balance between the health, the people buying into the fact that you don't really need to mix in your own house with other households because that's where the virus transmits, but maybe more buy-in to the fact that we need to allow people to meet up outside because the science shows that's okay. Meet up in retail venues where if you're wearing a mask and you're operating in a COVID safe environment, that works. And meeting in hospitality venues, pubs, restaurants, theatres where a very COVID safe table service, you know, socially distanced, physically distanced environment exists. So that's the next stage. So I'll finish there. I can answer any questions, Paul. I'm sorry I can't cover more than that, but I'm happy to, you know, there's not a lot you can say in the 10 minutes that can do justice to such a massive set of issues, but hopefully that's helped in setting a bit of a context.
That's amazing. Thanks very much, Tom. And I think on behalf of us all, thank you for being on two jobs at the start of the pandemic. There are a couple of questions that are coming through. I think it's the same question. So it's in the chat, but it's the linking to the track and trace app that was launched this morning, and how I guess the way in which people are set, that way in which that data is going to flow from the centre out to local places so that they can use it properly or usefully.
Yeah, so the app, I think, is a massive step forward. So we were in a position where we were going to have an app launch that had real data worries, where it was going to pass into a centralised database that, despite the government saying as much as they could that they weren't going to use it for any other purpose than COVID, people just, you know, didn't buy into that. So I think it's the right thing that they've changed tack and gone for this Apple Google based app where you control the data on your own phone. It's anonymous. People don't know who you are at the centre. They don't know where you are at the centre. But if you get a positive, you can order a positive test on the app. You can use it to check in using a QR code, which is really much better than a lot of the arrangements we've got at the moment, more consistent and easier for people. So you won't have to fill in your details every time. You'll just put your phone against the QR code. This is really good news. I'd like to see it used very widely in schools and sixth form colleges and universities, because I think at the moment we're sending 120 kids home for probably a handful of cases. If we had the app, and the phone's being used more widely in sixth form colleges and college settings, then I think we could target it much more. On the point in particular that's been raised and was raised by Newham, I agree with them. At the moment, the data isn't being passed. It would just be held by, the national system, and I think that needs to happen. It needs to be passed locally, and the more we can get local information on the app, and the local restrictions are available on the app, so you can find out what your rating is from just being part of it. That will help. But the more the decision makers locally have access to that data, the better.
Thank you. So if you'd like to join us for the rest, Tom, and listen in, that's great. If you've got questions, please do that. And then, as I've said in the chat, I've put in the mission statement for Open Data Saves Lives and what it does next. Our hope is that we test Open Data Saves Lives as a new type of institution for health and social care over the rest of this year. And then next year is to supercharge it, run it as a startup, as a mission-led, non-profit, startup-focused organisation that starts in 2021, when we're all trying to respond to the January and February response to COVID. So next up is Alistair Bullward from NHS Digital. NHS Digital are sponsors of ODI Leeds. I think it's fair to say over the last 2 years, they've started to get being open and how it can make a massive difference. Alistair's been part of that journey, and Open Data Saves Lives is a way for Alistair to communicate internally within NHS Digital how the power of open and also using the web properly can make a massive difference. So, Alistair, over to you.
Hi. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for having me. Hi, yes, I'm Alistair. I work at NHS Digital, as Paul just said. Was actually brought in to lead on open data about a year ago, but for the last 6 months, obviously been very much involved in our aspects of the COVID response. So what I was thinking of doing is talking through some of the work that we've been doing around our open data sets that we published and our dashboards at quite a working level, I guess is where I've been involved. Share some of the stuff we've done, and I think we've done some good stuff, but also talk about maybe some of the lessons we've learned, some of the challenges we face, and I guess what we do next as well. And I think it'd be great if that's where the group can potentially help us to help everyone else. So I guess I'd start off with saying that I think probably 5 months ago I did go back to our first open data release for COVID, which was the 111 triages where COVID was suspected, but we released in April. So since then, we've sort of been building out our open data offering in response to COVID, and I think I'm hoping we can then build this out to other areas within NHS Digital. So those that haven't seen it, I'm just going to share my screen. But we have we built kind of an open data dashboard data set hub, which you should be able to see now. So I'll drop the link in the chat after this, but this sort of gives an overview of data sets and that we've brought together in dashboards to hopefully make it more consumable. And then everything that is in these dashboards, obviously publishing the open data sets behind the scenes as well, which will enable enable for people who want to go at the data and do whatever they need to do, to use that appropriately. So probably our most common, most popular dashboard is our progression dashboard, which gives sort of an overview of the progression of the virus by upper-tier local authority. So probably get 800 to 1,000 hits on a normal day to this, and then we'll get spikes depending what's going on in the news. So it's not loading up now, and this just gives you some basic stats, what's been going over the last 7 days. You can sort of do a play feature where each of these dots is a local authority and see how they move around over time. Look at some basic stats, and you can see, somewhat depressingly, both cases and triages are moving upwards. So I guess we've been quite a lot of effort in terms of getting this out, certainly initially. This was the first dashboard and the first open data set we published. So if you go down to the links here, you can drop down on the publication page, get the CSVs, put a lot of work into having permalinks, good metadata, so it's all all indexed on Google, so people can get at the raw data as well, which I think is really, really important, as well as making it, a bit more consumable where we think that's appropriate, and also completely open to other people doing that as well, and we potentially could bring that onto our dashboard hub. That's something I'm discussing internally at the moment. And over time, we've built this out, so shielded patient lists, coronavirus triages, which I've just shown you, vaccine studies, so you can see people who are volunteering for vaccines. And interestingly, if you go onto that, Leeds does really well. See lots of altruistic people in Leeds volunteer for the trial, which is fantastic, especially when you adjust it by population. We more likely to volunteer than other areas. So you can see that little dot there. It's a little dark area of people who are volunteering, which is fantastic. And again, this is sort of show benefit and hopefully drive uptake of volunteering for trials for people who have tested for COVID and those that haven't. And then what we started to do is build out other sort of data sets and bring together potential dashboards around e-referrals and activities in hospitals, because obviously that's closely related to what's going on in COVID. We may have initially made that open data set to help commissioners for, an example of hospitals, but it can also be used for general sort of MI and insight. So keen to get that out there more and more. And so that went out in the last few weeks, started to this hub, and we're building that out as things progress. We have got our sort of standard open data offering, our sort of 300 odd publications that are also you can link to from our main website. I think some of the challenges we sort of focused, is one, I think, to start off with, we had either open or closed. Those are the two parts of the data spectrum we had. I think now one of the nice things over the last few months is we've got a middle ground. We've got, monitored. So we've got a Pillar 2 contained dashboard that, worked very closely on over the last few months. And I've sort of owned that as a product owner. That I think is now, reaching about 75% of local authorities are using that to look at Pillar 2 information, do some mapping, and see how the positive cases, as well as testing coverage and more triages spread over their local patch, and that goes all the way down to postcode now, which was in our last release. We're now continuing to sort of polish that in a number of ways, and we've also got a shielded patient list in that middle ground, and we've also got a cohort identification tool that's about to be released in the coming weeks to help research studies identify cohorts that are most suitable for them and where they are in the country. So I think one of the nice things over the last couple of months is I feel like we're playing in that middle ground now. So we're playing on the spectrum. It's not either it's open or it's closed, and then otherwise you can't have it. We've now got a bit of a support wrap and a proper service wrap about letting data out that disseminating that in a much more easier fashion. And then my ambition is to get as much stuff in that middle zone into open as stuff settles down, as we get the legal basis sorted and all the rest of it, because there are obviously a number of things we need to sort before we can get it into the open domain. So I think in terms of just touch on some of the lessons and complexities in terms of getting open data out there. So one of the, I think the key things is understanding the legal basis for everything we do. I think that's incredibly complicated, especially when COVID has been concerned, and we're covered by the COVID direction, which governs what we can and can't do. I think understanding, interpreting that, how to consult around all that in the early days was a massive learning curve. And I found quite frustrating because I felt I was having a lot of conversations and not doing anything. But I think that's something you have to go through. I think the other thing is sort of like certainly on a working level, with getting open data out there, getting dashboards out there that the public can access, is the sort of technical debt and internal complexity that you have to challenge. And I think that's been a big learning curve. Okay, so we've got a load of legacy systems, or just old systems that are still used. So 111 telephony is the one I often use. Quite a mature system, not really designed to go and get all the data out of the back end and shove it into something else to get it out onto out onto the internet so people can use it for all sorts of good purposes. We've had to build a lot of pipelines. They were all manual. We were all working shifts and nights, still do for some data feeds for COVID to manually extract stuff and get it out there. And we're only now starting to slowly automate it all. And it sounds easy, but it's actually incredibly complicated when you've got quite a lot of that kind of tech debt that we've built up. And I think that's one sort of when big lesson that we've learned. I think the other sort of big technical lesson in terms of getting stuff out there is performance, and making sure that what you can get out there is scalable. And I think there's two bits to that: making sure if it doesn't fall over, doesn't frustrate users, but then obviously, people are very concerned about reputational risk. What happens if your website goes over? What happens if your dashboard is switched off? And I think because there's so much focus on COVID, we're putting a lot of effort into hardening everything out, putting web throttling on, all this kind of good stuff. And again, I think I probably underestimated the complexity of that from a technical perspective. But it's taken a lot more effort and money to do to get that sort of hardening around everything that we do, when we're putting a lot of stuff new into the public domain. Hopefully mid-October we'll have addressed all the various issues around that. Obviously we addressed all the cybersecurity issues, much earlier on. But I think that again is kind of a lesson. If you want to get a lot of stuff out there and open, there's a lot of other sort of stuff on the periphery that you need to sort out in terms of making sure that you've got something that's properly scalable and resilient, and it isn't very, very, very flaky. And I think the other debt that we accumulated and still paying off, if I'm honest, is usability debt. So open data, you get it out there, you get it used, you try and get products out there that are open and are used. Do you really know all your users, how they're using it, and constantly getting those requirements back into the, into the center, which I guess is where I work. I've only been here a year, but I'm still getting my head around this. So I'm in the center. So, get stuff into the center, and we've got to try and respond to that. It's often hard to see what's going on out there. So I'm really interested in how we can make that more distributed and more efficient. But that has been a challenge. We'll get something out there for one use case, we'll use it for something else. It's fantastic, but that gives us more requirements we've got to respond to, and you get this bottleneck, and I end up having to have lots of conversations around prioritization. So I think that usability debt, and then how we become more decentralized, is sort of a key thing I'm interested in. But I think on the plus side, I think there's lots of stuff that we have that we didn't have before. We've got lots of load of infrastructure to get stuff out there in an open way, in a controlled way, as opposed to just that two ends of the data spectrum, which I think is really positive. And I think we're continuing to get good usage stats now in terms of people using our open data sets. That's obviously increased dramatically, as well as our dashboards. As I say, so we've got 1,000 people, probably 800 to 1,000 hitting progression on a normal day across everything. It's a bit more than that. In terms of our private stuff, we probably get about 2,500 views a week. And most of those are for the Pillar 2 contained dashboard, but SPL and permission to contact is coming up, which is really good. So that's it really. So what we're doing from Native Digital's perspective. I think main lessons learned, I think, is if I have my time again, probably make some slightly different decisions about accumulating some of our solutions, so we avoid technical debt, and means that we could do more with less. And I think I think now the main challenge is probably hardening what we've got, and then this constant question of aligning everything across what seems like a very complex system. It's really interesting to listen to Tom, who understands this much better than me. I'm a very small bit player, but I think it's around understanding, what are we doing, what are PHE doing, what are TTC doing, what are DHSC doing. Got all these players, and it's very hard to sort of have a view across that piece to understand what is best to do, because you don't want to duplicate, but you don't want to not do anything. And I think that's a constant balance. I certainly feel like I'm trying to tread, in terms of what we can do that's most helpful for the wider system. So I think that's organizational complexity, I think, is something that we're probably still navigating, and that again can make it more complicated when I'm asking for funding, trying to get stuff out there, looking for a commission, which is all very dry subjects, but really is what enables us to do stuff, really. certainly in the center in NHS Digital. So that's it really. And I think I know I've said that twice, and I'll say one more thing, but I think
Alistair,
I'll finish now. Over to you, Paul.
Because we've got a couple of questions. So
I see questions coming in.
So there's I put in the chat that in effect you've been using us as a pseudo user group to feedback on what you're doing, and that if you want to feedback to people who are building stuff that people are actually using, if there's it's not so much a back channel, but a sort of a side channel in. Please use Open Data Saves Lives to do that, and feedback to Alistair on the tools. It's a really good informal way of getting feedback to the teams. I've got a question, which is, should NHS Digital be actually building tools or just publishing data?
So it's from you. So I I think it's a balance. I think on the whole, we should just publish data. That's my personal view. I think we can underpin a much wider and more diverse ecosystem by doing that. I think where it makes sense, we have to, it makes sense to build some tools on top of it. But fundamentally, I think we should be getting data out there so that people are closer to the problem that can do it. Which is why I'm keen. I tend to use the dashboards because they're pretty on a presentation, but all of these, their own data sets behind them that people can go off and do whatever they want. But I think that's my personal view and where our focus should be.
Absolutely, that's good. And then I'll let Mark ask his question because he knows what the four-letter acronym is there.
Is this
healthcare acquired infection.
Yeah.
So no, I'm really interested in Alistair, and I know we're sort of talking offline about this, and I think I have some sympathy with your sort of apolitical role of just trying to get data out there and let other people come up with sort of ugly research questions. But I wonder if you might consider that. So the data there, no, it's no disrespect to you, the data on the hospital is quite dry. There's some really, important data about, say, the spread of healthcare acquired infections. So if 1 in 8 people are catching COVID in hospitals, it'd be really good to agree, national definitions of how many days since you got admitted you caught it is definitely the fault of the hospital, or probably, or indeterminately, and you're kind of well away from that. In the data set you've got, you talk about the use of independent sector data, so that implies an interesting question. Are the independent sectors stepping up and helping cover elective work while COVID is going on? So that's difficult to get at from your data, but I just think so. I was going to sort of lobby you to say, I think you need to work harder to ask a research question, then get a data set which answers it. But I think I actually, on reflection, have sympathy with if you're just there as the miner, almost just putting getting more and more data out there, and then let others kind of think about the question. So if you're talking about putting independent sector data on there, someone like me can say, well, okay, that's really interesting. Let's see if outcomes are changing because people are getting treated in private hospitals as opposed to NHS ones, and then come back to you and say, and I need another data set now and another data, rather than you trying to come up with the questions, because that makes you quite political quite quickly, doesn't it, I think, as the centre.
And also it's hard to know where to start, if I'm honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I think I'm always open to the charge if you go the other way of let's just get the data out there, let the use cases come out. They're saying you're doing something without user research. Why are you doing that? That's the one half of the equation. But the other half is, but by doing that, I enable, it's like a canary down the mine. You see what happens, see what, throw something down a well and see what rebounds back. But on the flip side, you're probably going to produce something that isn't immediately going to serve everyone's needs. And it's that balance. But I mean, I think that's why, these kind of channels are really useful, to be honest, Mark, because at least we can get that feedback.
Yeah, exactly. And it may be that there's a couple that are not too spicy enough for you to kind of get involved in and go, right, we are going to now step into, mortality data or healthcare acquired infection data, because there are pretty good nationally agreed definitions of those. And that would be a more interesting, that would be another new dashboard that would be really cool to put out there. Is the 1 in 8 right? Is the 1 in 8, does it vary between 1 in 10 and 1 in 6 or not? Does it vary between 1 in 20 in some hospitals where no one catches it in the hospital? That starts to get interesting really, really quickly. So if offline, you follow 2 tracks. One is just keep going, getting more and more data out there, but also landing on a few big use cases in consultation with people like us. That might be a nice way to kind of develop it.
No, I think that sounds very sensible. We'll catch up offline around various bits. But I think
that's fab.
Yeah, those kind of vanguard use cases are important because it helps me go and justify the benefit as well, which is good.
Excellent. So I don't have any other questions for Alistair in the chat. Alistair's big supporter of ODI Leeds, part of Open Data Saves Lives. If you have feedback for Alistair, please do it via us, via Beautiful Info, via the by Twitter, however you want to we'll get in touch with Alistair. And I think the development of lots more use cases, gaps in what the data is being published, and also using the data as ODI Leeds is doing to build a dashboard. And we're the best way to find out how the data works is to build your own dashboard and then feed that back, because that we can then feed that back to NHS Digital, who might be able to build the thing that we need to monitor locally.
Yeah, and if that. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is move on to Chris Bates now. So talk about the Open Safely project and something that I think has been a massive success for people who have been looking at health data over the last 6 to 7 months. So over to you, Chris.
Good morning. As Paul says, I'm Chris Bates, I'm Research Director at TPP, of which a little bit more later. Just before I start, massive thanks to Tom as a lead citizen for all the work he's done locally and nationally, and also thanks to NHSD through Alistair, who have helped us do some really important projects over the last few months, which has been massively appreciated. So thank you. I'm going to talk to you about Open Safely. I'm just going to share my screen. And the platform, Open Safely is a platform for EHR research. I've massively overestimated what I'll get through in 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to be quick. And we developed this in a hurry in March. And the question really is there, is in the context of a national emergency, a global emergency, can we develop a highly secure platform for EHR research at a massive scale, and can we do it quickly? And we were working on behalf of NHS England and NHSX. This question kind of came down through the academic routes with Ben Goldacre's team at the University of Oxford and Liam Smith at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, from Chris Whitty and Patrick Valance. And we know we've got very, very rich primary care data in the UK, for example, and can we exploit that data to do some important research quickly? TPP, for those of you who don't know, we're an electronic health record supplier and a clinical systems supplier based here in Leeds. We supply systems to about 7,000 NHS organisations. For the purpose of this talk, really, the most important thing is about 3,000 GP practices. So we've got a database that for general practice covers about 25 million people in England, so approaching half of England. And we knew, I know Ben Goldacre, I've known him for a few years, so this conversation started, can we answer that question? Can we do something about it? Technically, so we knew we had to do something differently, and I'll be very brief here, but I'll happily go into more detail with people who are interested. We shifted the model, so all the data we've got, highly confidential, sensitive healthcare data on TPP systems lives in NHS accredited data centres. And our, the standard sort of approach to analytics and research has been to move that data out in large extracts, for some very, very worthy purposes. But we knew we couldn't do it for this project. One, we knew we didn't have the infrastructure to do that and move that data quickly. Two, we knew it's highly confidential and it was better to try and keep it in situ. So we left 99% of the data where it was without trying to shift it around, and got the governance and ethics permissions that we needed from Secretary of State, etc., to build this research platform. And on top of that, there's layers of different de-identification here. So actually the research teams only access what we class as very low dimensional data, which is not very disclosive, but they retain the power of all the medications, diagnoses, immunizations, demographic factors that all live on our kind of comprehensive GP records. And what we do with that data remains there, but the researchers and the analytic teams at the universities, they dial into the data center. So we brought the analytics to the data rather than shifting it out. On top of that, every query is logged. Data access is completely restricted. There's lots more information about that on the website, but we've tried to build as secure platform as possible for this kind of research. Where have we got to with that? Well, actually, it happened really quickly. It's there's probably only about 20 people on the team total across the three organisations with support from NHSE. So very quickly we had 25 million records of primary care EHR data, linked to emergency care data, intensive care data, lab test results, death certificates. Very recently, NHS Digital have worked hard to get us the high cost drug data for some very specific analyses that are going to happen. So we've got this data set now, which has got about 20 billion rows of healthcare data and covers about 7 billion patient months. So it's, it's massively powerful. And why do we need it at that scale? Well, of course, we all know the scale of the tragedy we've had here and the number of excess deaths. But when you want to do descriptive analyses down to very specific cohorts, so if we want to know in a certain ethnic group, a certain age band, a certain gender, certain long-term conditions, what are the risks to people in that category, you start to actually work with very small numbers, which you can't do powerful analyses on unless you've got a very big data set. So leveraging that data set at this scale has been really important to the work we've been doing. what were the key questions that we were answering or trying to answer on behalf of NHSE? Briefly, what are the risk factors for poor COVID outcome? What are the drug exposures and that may help or may actually cause harm for people who unfortunately contract the virus? How can we do better surveillance? Going back to Tom's first talk, and again, a thing that Tom mentioned, which I think is vastly important, certainly in the arena of mental health. How do we measure and mitigate some of those COVID aftershocks as we come out of the pandemic and then into subsequent waves? How can we use EHR research level data to try and address some of that? Our first major outcome, we still think, is the largest COVID study done anywhere on Earth so far. This was for 17 million people and was a descriptive analysis of all the risk factors associated with COVID. Some of those were demographic factors, ethnicity, social deprivation, gender, etc. Some of them were much more clinical, so around immunosuppression, diabetes, hypertension. And that was published in Nature about 2 months ago. And I'll happily forward a paper and put a link in for anyone who's interested. That is all open because of COVID, even for Nature, which is quite extraordinary. It was picked up, interestingly, by lots of international news outlets, and for a data audience, I think the most interesting thing for me was that some of the interest wasn't just around those risk factors and the actual who was most at risk of COVID and that sort of interesting information, but also the approach to doing it. So most noticeably, Hal Hodson in The Economist wrote a really good summary of the approach we've taken to allow access to highly confidential data in a secure way, in a way that can benefit other researchers that I'll get onto in a second, but is delivering very powerful results. And as Paul said earlier, this is real. You can see the code, you can, the real data. It's not just a conversation we've been having. Of course, we haven't stopped there. We've got a good production line now with Oxford and London School of important analyses coming out. So here's some examples. Hydroxychloroquine. I'm sure many people on the call will remember Donald Trump advocating that you should take this prophylactically a few months ago. At this scale, we've been able to do the analysis on that and prove categorically there's absolutely no evidence for that. You shouldn't be taking it. NSAIDs, so ibuprofen. Again, lots of news reports early on that ibuprofen was potentially associated with worse outcomes from COVID. There's no evidence for that at all. And then inhaled corticosteroids, so inhalers that lots of people use for asthma or COPD. Again, what's the evidence base behind using them? And there is no evidence that you're at increased risk from that. So people using inhalers should keep doing so. So these are really important questions for people's day-to-day lives that we've been able to put the scientific evidence base behind. And then finally, literally last night, a new preprint has come out about ethnic differences in COVID-19 infection. And we've been able to show that there is definitely an increased risk of COVID infection and poor outcome in ethnic communities in the UK. And that even when we control for other factors such as long-term conditions and household size, that effect is still there. We think it's things that are not measured in electronic health records, so or not well measured, so occupation status, some structural discrimination potentially. There's things we really need to try and understand that are not there in that data, which are just leading to more questions for us to try and answer. Of course, an ODI event, this data is not open. At the level that it is, it's highly confidential, it's highly sensitive, and that data can't be made open. But everything we've tried to do with the Open Safely project is open. So all the analytic code, all the SQL, all the research protocols, all the code lists, everything we've done, we've got on a series of GitHub repos for people to go have a look at. So what we're really encouraging is for people to go and look at the analysis, look at how we've defined things, look at what research is coming up and to comment on that and help us hopefully improve some of that. And also to use that code. Nothing we've done is specific to the TPP primary care database. This analytic structure above it is pretty agnostic as to the data set it can run on. It's kind of just bespoke code for trusted research environments specifically designed for healthcare data. Finally, what's next? Well, we've done all this without any funding. It was clear early on that we just needed to get on and do this at both the industry and the academic side. So we've had no funding so far, which means we've struggled to onboard more teams. But the priority really now is to onboard more research teams around the country from different universities. Funding streams are coming online. It's mainly at the academic side that we need the funding streams to be able to support the technical aspects of getting people using that data. It is an NHS England data asset. The priority questions come down from NHSE, and the process has been put in place as to what those questions are, and what do we want to be able to answer with the database. Is it around post-surveillance once vaccines come through, for example? So as we get more and more research teams, we'll be able to increase the output and hopefully use sort of methodology we've designed to really cash in on some of the rich data that we do have, certainly in primary care in the UK, to help us with the COVID response. So no idea if that was anywhere near 10 minutes, Paul, but thank you very much.
That's amazing, Chris. Thanks so much for doing that. And I think it's really good to get a good news story out of COVID, because I think the fact that we've managed to build this, do it in the open, and it actually exists and has been completed. And I think, yeah, there's a virtual round of applause that needs to be given to the teams that have done that. And as you know, we know Ben, we've worked and TPP, and the fact that this exists, it has been completed, it's been done in the open. And basically what's happened here is that a team has been funded to do a project, not a project that has been commissioned. And I don't think the way of procuring stuff in the old way of doing things would have allowed this to happen. So the massive opportunity, the massive surplus you've generated around your work needs to be congratulated. And I guess one of the things we want Open Data Saves Lives to do next is allow people to fund the teams to do things rather than commission projects to do that, because you lose so much time, effort and resource in pitching, winning and then delivering against the project management requirements of a project rather than fixing a problem. And doing it in the open allows you to do that, because that this code, this data, this analysis, these methods are going to be used by many, many other researchers in the future to answer the questions we can't predict yet. So this is a massive resource. And I think that the fact that we have got no questions, but lots of rounds of applause in the chat is amazing. So just before we finish, we've got 10 minutes left. I'd like, I mentioned Open Data Saves Lives and what we do next at the start of this. And I'm going to ask Mark Farr, who's our co-conspirator, partner in crime, collaborator, co-constructor of Open Data Saves Lives, just to give us 60 seconds on what we're planning to do next, and also how you might get involved. So Mark, if you just let people know who you are and why we're doing it, and then you can close off the session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. I've sent you some slides if you want to show those, or we can just post those, which kind of explain it. Like you,
I think you just talk it through. Yeah, you just talk it through. Yeah.
Okay. Paul and I have been doing a lot of stuff offline and meeting a lot of the people that are on here, which has been really a fantastic benefit through COVID. We're at a point now where we're trying to kind of encapsulate that in a new organisation. So we're talking about the mechanics of that, and at the risk of doing it the normal way, we've put a deck together to kind of explain and actually put our words down of what we mean, which we can send round. So that's made us think about what we're trying to do. And I might just read from a couple of those and then send this round. So we've put Open Data Saves Lives together. We created it to drive open innovation with data. Our aim is to help reduce health inequalities by creating for the first time a true network of collaborators and resources in the open. We'll be radical in our approach and hold ourselves to account. And I think below that, we've then listed 4 things that we're going to try and do. And we're already talking to Alistair on the first one of this. The first one is, these are deliberately confrontational terms for now, but the first one is kind of give the data back. So any data that I send up from the NHS, so I'm a chief analytical officer in a big trust, and I've got a regional analytics role for Kent and Medway as well. Thanks, Paul. So that's our kind of first one. We have an industry of sending data off that we never see again. So that whole point about if data is being collected through these new apps, just let us use it. It doesn't need to be identifiable, it can be completely anonymous. That's really important. The second one, and I think the TPP stuff is really interesting, is we're calling it Save Lives, Not Data. So there's a really important IG conversation going on with the extension of the COPI notice through to next year, and we hope beyond, where people are clearly doing altruistic things with the data that they're sharing. So we want to just shine a light on things like TPP. I've given examples in the past of being allowed for the first time to link police data to health data, to look at domestic abuse during lockdown, and we're making some strong arguments in terms of IG. If you just go to the next two, Paul. So historically, a lot of this data is kind of held in a way which isn't helpful, either by government or by industry. And that was part of my kind of lobbying, Alistair. I think we need more data out more quickly, not hidden in things like NHS Futures, these kind of walled gardens which just sort of spring up like Popsy. Get the data out there, make sure the IG framework is in place, but break down people kind of holding on to it as they've done in the past. And then the fourth one, and this is a reflection of the journey, the last point I'll make is the journey Paul and I have been on over the last 6 months since we both caught COVID in the same place at the same time, sharing information and data through WhatsApp with each other, talking about a metallic taste in our mouth a month before it was on the BBC. There's a huge market for people to safely and altruistically share data about themselves into an appropriate research data set. So those four things are kind of what we're standing for. We'll post these slides. Please get involved. I'm conscious I only had a minute, so I've kind of raced through that, Paul, but we're really keen to collaborate further with people on here, and we've already got some kind of fledgling projects in play.
Thank you. If you want to join in, please let us know. We're not messing about. This is going to be up and running by the end of the year. We've already got some stuff talking, and Chris from TPP will be in touch about a project we need to speak to you about. So if there's no money, if there's no other questions, I'm aiming to finish before the hour, so I can have a cup of tea, maybe get some lunch. Thanks very much. Open Data Saves Lives carries on in 2 weeks' time. We're going to talk about data dashboards, communications. We're going to get right into it. ODI Leeds have been building dashboards, other people have been building dashboards. And we're really happy that Jenny Tennyson from ODI HQ is going to take us through her analysis of the Public Health England data. And you may have seen her post online about how she's looked at that data. But we're going to have a proper nerdathon of how that data has been presented, how it can be accessed. So Jenny's going to go through that, and the ODI Leeds team are going to join in. And we're hopefully going to find another talk. So we're going to, usually have 3 speakers, so we're going to try and find another speaker to really get into the data. And then what I want to do by the end of that session is try and come to an agreement about what is useful data we can present to people in a useful way to help them make sense of their current risk, what should they be worried, should they not be worried, and also what the data they're looking at. Is it current? Is it useful? Do we need to help them do that? So a real sort of working session on the next one, but it's all about making sense of the open data that has been published. And then, Alistair, hopefully by the end of it, there may also be some use cases that we would feed back to you and say, look, can we just tweak this? Can you stop publishing data for the next 2 days because it's shonky, and just make it a 3-day deprecation? And please stop posting 0 data in your API because then it screws up everyone's dashboards. So there's loads of stuff around that. And actually, the actual data for the day is published on the website, but not in the data. So there's, and you could say we've already practiced some of this, but please sign up for the next one because it's going to be a really great session about making useful stuff for people to navigate the COVID pandemic. So thanks very much. We'll be in touch, and thanks again to our speakers. A round of applause to everyone. Some great work there. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Oh, just someone's asked, how do we sign up for the next event? Well, so we'll email you on the, now you're on that, we'll email you that, build on Twitter, and it's on the Open Data Saves Lives one page.